The shadow of Blackwood Village. Blackwood Village was nestled deep in the mountains, surrounded by dense forests that whispered in the wind. Its people were a close-knit community, bound by shared traditions and old tales. One such tale spoke of the Watcher, a nameless entity that had haunted the village for centuries. Few dared to speak its name aloud, for fear it would awaken the dormant curse. Things changed when the disappearances began. It started with a young shepherd boy who never returned home. His flock was found scattered, their bleating filling the misty woods, but the boy was gone. Then an elderly woman vanished while tending her garden at dusk. Each time, the villagers found no trace of the missing, only a faint, sour smell lingering in the air and claw-like marks on the ground. The villagers grew fearful. They avoided the woods at night, locked their doors, and whispered prayers to ward off the unknown. But deep down, they knew the Watcher had returned. Elena, the village healer, had always dismissed the stories as superstitions meant to keep children obedient. She was a practical woman, relying on herbs and logic rather than fear. But even she began to notice the strange occurrences. Her animals refused to go outside after dark, shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long at twilight, and her dreams were haunted by a tall, gaunt figure with glowing eyes. One evening, Elena found deep gouges etched into the door of her cottage. The marks formed no recognizable symbol, but they seemed deliberate. She felt a chill run down her spine as she traced them with trembling fingers. That night, she bolted her windows and lit every candle in the house. Despite her precautions, Elena woke in the middle of the night to a soft, rasping sound, like claws scraping against wood. She held her breath, too terrified to move. The sound stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep, guttural whisper. "You cannot hide." Desperate for answers, the villagers held a meeting in the town square. They decided to send a group of their bravest men to investigate the forest, where the Watcher was said to dwell. Armed with torches, axes, and holy symbols, the group ventured into the woods at dawn, determined to uncover the truth. Hours passed with no sign of the men. By nightfall, the remaining villagers heard distant screams echoing through the trees, followed by an unnatural silence. The search party never returned. Elena, now convinced of the Watcher's existence, began studying old village records. She found fragmented accounts of similar events, unexplained vanishings, claw marks, and whispered warnings. The accounts all ended the same way, with the entire village abandoning their homes or succumbing to the Watcher's wrath. Over the following nights, the Watcher grew bolder. Villagers reported seeing its gaunt form lurking at the edge of the woods, its glowing eyes watching from the darkness. Children claimed to hear it whispering their names as they lay in bed. Crops began to wither, and livestock were found mutilated, their carcasses arranged in grotesque patterns. The village priest, Father Anton, declared it a punishment for the villagers' sins. He organized nightly prayers in the church, urging everyone to seek forgiveness. Yet even within the church's stone walls, people felt the Watcher's presence, a suffocating dread that made the air heavy and cold. One night, during a prayer session, the church doors burst open. A strong wind extinguished the candles, plunging the room into darkness. Amid the panicked cries, a single voice rose above the chaos, a deep, echoing whisper, "You belong to me." The villagers, now terrified, began turning on one another. Accusations of witchcraft and betrayal flew, each person desperate to find a scapegoat. Elena pleaded for calm, but her own sanity was unraveling. She could no longer sleep, haunted by visions of the Watcher standing over her bed, its skeletal fingers reaching for her throat. One by one, people began to disappear. Some were taken from their homes in the dead of night. Others vanished while walking the streets, leaving only faint claw marks behind. The village grew quieter with each passing day, the once bustling square now empty and desolate. Elena knew she had to confront the entity. Armed with a lantern, a dagger, and a pouch of protective herbs, she ventured into the woods alone. The forest was unnaturally silent, the only sound her own footsteps crunching on dead leaves. She followed the claw marks, which grew more frequent and erratic the deeper she went. The air grew colder, and the sour smell intensified, making her stomach churn. Finally, she reached a clearing. At its center stood an ancient stone altar, covered in fresh blood. As Elena approached the altar, the shadows around her began to writhe and twist. From the darkness, the Watcher emerged. It was taller than she had imagined, its skeletal frame wrapped in tattered, blackened skin. Its glowing eyes bored into hers, filled with malice and hunger. "You cannot stop this," it hissed, its voice a chorus of whispers. "This village is mine. Always has been. Always will be." Elena clutched her dagger, her hands trembling. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded. The Watcher tilted its head, as if amused. "I am the darkness that feeds on fear, the shadow that grows in despair. You gave me life with your terror. Now I take what is owed." Elena lunged forward, plunging the dagger into the creature's chest. It let out a deafening roar, the ground shaking beneath her feet. For a moment, she thought she had succeeded. But then the Watcher laughed, a low, guttural sound that made her blood run cold. "You cannot kill what has no life," it whispered. The lantern shattered, plunging the clearing into darkness. Days later, a wandering traveler passed through Blackwood Village, only to find it completely abandoned. Houses stood empty, doors left ajar, and personal belongings scattered as if the residents had fled in a hurry. The traveler ventured into the woods, curious about the eerie silence. In the clearing, he found the stone altar, now covered in claw marks and surrounded by bones. At its center lay a single message, carved deep into the rock. "I have taken them. The darkness grows. I am waiting." The traveler fled, spreading tales of the cursed village. Blackwood became a forbidden place, avoided by all who valued their lives. Yet, on certain moonless nights, distant whispers could be heard from the woods, carrying the Watcher's promise. "You will be next." The Curse of Hollowmoor Village. Hollowmoor Village was a quiet, unassuming place, surrounded by endless marshlands and shrouded in perpetual fog. The villagers lived simple lives, tending to their sheep and weaving tales about the cursed mist that rolled in every year during the autumn. They called it the Morning Veil, a thick fog that seemed to swallow the world whole. The villagers believed the mist was a punishment, a remnant of an old betrayal from centuries ago. "Don't wander into the veil," the elders would warn. "Those who do are never seen again." When young Emma Carter disappeared, the village erupted in panic. She had been gathering herbs by the edge of the marsh when the mist descended early. By the time her family noticed she was missing, the only trace of her was a faint trail of footsteps leading into the fog. They ended abruptly at the edge of the swamp, where the air felt unnaturally cold. Emma wasn't the first to vanish, but her disappearance was the most recent in nearly a decade of peace. The elders whispered that the curse had been reignited, though no one knew why. The only clue lay with Gerald Weaver, the last person to return after entering the Morning Veil. Gerald was a broken man. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, and he spoke only in cryptic fragments. "The mist, it sees," he would mutter, rocking back and forth in his chair. "It calls you by name. Don't answer. Don't follow." When questioned about what he saw, Gerald would shudder and refuse to speak further. But one thing was clear. Something dwelled within the mist, something ancient and malevolent. A month after Emma's disappearance, a stranger arrived in Hollowmoor. He was a tall, gaunt man dressed in a black cloak, his face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. He introduced himself as Elias Grayson, a scholar of folklore and the occult. "I've heard of your plight," Elias told the villagers. "I've studied similar phenomena in other regions. The answers may lie in the past." Reluctantly, the villagers allowed him to stay, though many distrusted his dark aura and piercing gaze. Elias began his research, combing through the village's dusty archives. He discovered an old ledger detailing the village's history, including an account of a deal struck with a nameless being centuries ago. The ledger told of a famine that had once plagued Hollowmoor, threatening to wipe out its people. In desperation, the villagers had called upon an otherworldly entity from the swamp. The being promised to save their crops, but in exchange, it demanded a blood pact, a soul every decade, offered willingly or taken by force. When the villagers failed to uphold their end of the deal, the entity unleashed the Morning Veil to claim what was owed. As autumn deepened, the mist grew thicker, creeping closer to the village with each passing night. Livestock began disappearing, their bleats swallowed by the heavy fog. Children claimed to hear voices whispering their names, sweet and beckoning, from the edges of the marsh. Elias warned the villagers not to answer the whispers, but fear and desperation clouded their judgment. A hunter named William ventured into the mist one evening, armed with a bow and a lantern. He promised to return with answers. He didn't. The next morning, the villagers found his lantern smashed and his bow broken, lying in the middle of the marsh. Around them, the fog seemed almost alive, curling like fingers toward their feet. Elias pieced together the fragments of the ledger and realized the only way to end the curse was to confront the entity and renegotiate the pact. But to do so, someone had to willingly enter the mist and call its name. The villagers argued fiercely about who should go. Some believed Elias, the outsider, should be the one to risk his life. Others thought it should be Gerald, the only one who had survived the mist before. In the end, Elena Carter, Emma's grieving mother, volunteered. "I've already lost everything," she said, her voice steady. "If this is the only way to save the village, so be it." Armed with nothing but a torch and a locket containing Emma's picture, Elena stepped into the mist. The air grew colder with each step, and the whispers began almost immediately. "Elena!" The voice was soft and sweet, like Emma's, but Elena clenched her fists and pushed forward. In the heart of the mist, Elena found it, a towering, shadowy figure with eyes like burning coals. Its form shifted and twisted, as if it were made of smoke and darkness. The air around it pulsed with an unnatural energy, and Elena felt her strength waning. "You have come willingly," the entity said, its voice a deep, resonant echo. "But a single soul will not suffice. Your village broke its promise. The price must be paid in full." Elena fell to her knees, clutching the locket. "Please," she begged. "Take me and spare the others." The entity let out a low, rumbling laugh. "Your sacrifice is noted, but the dead is greater than one soul." Elena realized too late that she had been lured into a trap. The mist began to writhe and expand, spreading back toward the village. The villagers waited anxiously at the edge of the marsh, hoping to see Elena return. Instead, the mist surged forward, consuming the fields and creeping into the village square. From within the fog came the sound of Elena's screams, followed by a deep, guttural whisper, "You cannot escape. I will take what is mine." One by one, the villagers were swallowed by the mist, their cries fading into silence. By morning, Hollowmore was empty. The houses stood abandoned, their doors hanging open. The marsh had expanded, swallowing the village entirely, leaving no trace of its people. Travelers who passed near the area claimed to see shadows moving in the fog and hear faint whispers calling their names. Those who answer are never seen again. The morning veil lingers still, spreading further each year, patient and insatiable. Somewhere within, the entity waits, feeding on the fear and despair of those who dare to draw near. And in the heart of the mist, if you listen closely, you can still hear Elena's voice, faint and desperate, forever calling for her lost daughter. The ruin of Eldermoor. Eldermoor was a secluded coastal village perched on the edge of jagged cliffs. Its people lived in quiet harmony, tending to the sea and their modest lives. Yet, beneath the calm surface, the villagers shared an unspoken fear, a bell that tolled deep in the night. The bell had no visible source. It rang from the cliffs, carried on the wind, loud enough to stir the villagers from their sleep. No one dared to investigate. Those who tried never returned. When the bell rang 3 times, something terrible always followed. Livestock would die, boats would capsize, or someone would vanish into the shadows. The villagers whispered of an ancient curse tied to the cliffs, but they kept their fears to themselves, as if speaking them aloud would summon the doom they dreaded. One foggy morning, a stranger arrived in Eldermoor. Lydia Westwood was an archaeologist, lured by tales of the mysterious bell and the ruins that dotted the cliffs. She was drawn to the stories, believing them to be remnants of forgotten rituals and folklore. The villagers were wary of her presence, especially when she expressed her desire to explore the cliffs. "The cliffs are cursed," warned old Marlin, the village elder. "That bell you hear? It calls to the lost. It's best you leave it be." Lydia, skeptical yet intrigued, dismissed the warnings. She rented a small cottage at the edge of the village, unpacked her tools, and began her investigation. The first night, Lydia heard the bell. Its mournful toll echoed through the village, sending shivers down her spine. She watched from her window as the villagers locked their doors and extinguished their lanterns. A strange fog began to roll in from the cliffs, dense and unnaturally cold. Compelled by curiosity, Lydia stepped outside, following the sound of the bell. As she approached the cliffs, she felt the air grow heavier, and the fog seemed to part for her. In the distance, she glimpsed an ancient, crumbling bell tower half submerged in the sea. But as she moved closer, a figure emerged from the mist. It was tall and humanoid, yet its form was twisted, its limbs unnaturally long, and its face obscured by shadow. It pointed at her, and a voice boomed in her mind, "Turn back. This is not your place." Terrified, Lydia fled back to the village. Despite her fear, Lydia's determination only grew. She spent the next day questioning the villagers, piecing together fragments of Eldermoor's dark history. Long ago, the village had been the site of a cult that worshipped an ancient sea god. To appease the god, they offered human sacrifices, ringing the bell to call their deity to witness. The practice ended when the cult was violently overthrown by the villagers' ancestors, who razed the temple and drowned the bell tower. Yet, the villagers believed the sea god's wrath had never subsided. The bell, they said, still called for sacrifices. Against all warnings, Lydia decided to explore the ruins. Armed with her tools and a lantern, she made her way to the cliffs at dusk. The path to the ruins was treacherous, winding along the cliffs and descending into the mist-shrouded shore. Lydia found the bell tower, its stone walls eroded by centuries of salt and wind. Inside, she discovered the bell itself, massive and tarnished, its surface etched with strange, shifting symbols. As she examined it, the bell tolled, though no one had struck it. The sound was deafening, vibrating through her bones. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the air filled with whispers, indistinct, yet filled with malice. From the sea, the figure she had seen before rose, now fully visible. It was grotesque, its body a fusion of human and sea creature, with barnacles covering its skin and eyes that glowed like the depths. It spoke in a guttural, otherworldly voice. "You have disturbed the depths. The sacrifice must be made." Lydia, trembling, tried to flee, but the entity blocked her path. "Your kind broke the pact," it growled. "You took from me, and now you must give back." She pleaded, claiming she had no knowledge of the ancient pact, but the creature's gaze bore into her. "One must pay for the sins of the past," it said. "You shall bear the burden." Before Lydia could react, the creature reached for her, and the bell tolled again. The villagers, hearing the sound, gathered at the cliffs, fearful yet compelled. They saw the mist churn, and the shadow of the bell tower loom larger than ever before. Then Lydia's scream pierced the night, echoing across the cliffs. By dawn, the mist had receded and Lydia was gone. The villagers found her lantern lying shattered at the base of the cliffs, alongside a trail of salt water leading into the sea. But the bell did not stop. It rang twice that morning, and then again at night. Each toll brought the mist closer to the village, and with it, an overwhelming sense of dread. The villagers realized too late that the curse had been awakened fully. The bell's toll became constant, a mournful dirge that echoed day and night. One by one, the villagers began to vanish, swallowed by the mist or taken by the sea. Within a week, Eldermore was deserted. The cliffs remained, but the village faded into legend, a ghost story told by sailors and travelers. They spoke of a bell that could be heard on stormy nights, its sound carrying across the waves, a warning to those who dared approach. Some claimed to see a shadowy figure standing at the cliffs, watching, waiting. And on moonless nights, when the fog rolled in thick and cold, whispers rose from the sea, promising that the bell's hunger would never end.